fellow travelers, and welcome to the First and Stars podcast. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because aboard the mothership is Zach Thompson. You know him as the writer from Ka-Zar, Lord of the Savage Land, and I Breathed a Body. He currently is the writer of Nature's Labyrinth. Now join us as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Thompson. Thank you so much for coming to the First and Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Totally my pleasure, sir. So I always start off with the question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who were your earliest influences?
Oh, geez. What inspired my love for comics? Honestly, like lately, the answer I've been giving people is Batman the Animated Series. It's just been on my mind a lot. And I was like probably 6 years old when it was on TV. And so I used to watch it all the time. And it was just this like incredibly dark children's show, you know, that really dealt with like emotional themes and was super compelling and sort of invited me into the world of like Batman and reading my older brother's like X-Men issues and that kind of thing. And then it's just like, it's, as you know, it's like a rabbit hole. You just sort of like tumble into it, and then like years go by and you're like, oh, I'm obsessed with comics now.
It does get into your blood, doesn't it?
Yeah. And like as far as like influences and stuff, I think like that came like probably a decade or two later, where I started reading stuff that really inspired me, like the work of Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, and you know the British invasion in the 80s, and then like that sort of prompted a further explosion of discovery around like Vertigo type books and creator owned stuff that was out there from Image in the mid 2000s at this point. And so like I don't know, it's just like I don't know, I could ramble for a really long time, but that's sort of like the gateway that sort of led me into this whole thing.
You named some great ones. Like I said, the Batman series, watched that as a kid, loved every minute. Got pleasure of interviewing some of the people behind the scenes, like Dan Riva recently. Love that show so much.
Hell yeah.
Batman Massive Phantasm may be the best Batman movie ever made, in my opinion.
I agree. Like whenever that comes up, I'm always just like, no, like let's consider the fact that like they made an animated movie and released it in theaters, and like it's so good. Yeah, big fan. Yeah.
Well, I read that you attended film school in Vancouver, British Columbia. What inspired the decision, and was the focus screenwriting?
So the focus wasn't screenwriting at the beginning. I came out to film school and I was like, I want to make movies and I want to direct. And then I did that at school and I was like, I don't like this very much. I didn't like being in the chaotic environment of being on set and having to manage like 30 people and stuff. And I just found that whole thing just didn't like sit well with me. I don't know. And then like I started to realize I actually wanted to write. I was more interested in the behind the scenes stuff and like being able to screenwrite something and then give it to people and then just be like, and I'm out. Like I don't have to deal with 2 months of chaos, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that was just also me being young and not understanding like how much responsibility all of that stuff is. And like it's like film school's cool, but it's always not always the best environment to learn these types of things because certain people maybe don't have the same amount of discipline or the same goals. So you sort of get a situation where you're like, if a team of 7 is supposed to be making a short film, but only 3 of them are doing all the work, it gets really hard. And anyway, so I was disillusioned with the whole thing and I was like, I'm going to write. And that led me to like 2 years of screenwriting and the screenwriting program was actually where I met my writing partner, or my often writing partner, Lonnie Nadler, who I did a lot of my early work with. We went to the same program and weren't actually like really in contact with one another. And then we were on the same bus coming back from Emerald City Comic Con, going back to Vancouver. And I think he had like a Jeff Lemire sketch. And I was like, oh man, that's so cool. And we just got talking and we realized that we were at the same school and we were both like big comic fans, but also like screenwriters. And so we're like, why don't we just like talk about maybe trying to write a comic together? That could be a fun experience. And then like we worked on a bunch of stuff and pitched stuff for years, and like after about 3 years of going to every con and being like, will you please read my stuff? Um we got a lucky break and got to get like one of our early books published. It was really and then it's like all been a blur from there.
Well, what I really like is that when you're talking about film school and how in a group of 7 only 3 are really trying, it gave me high school flashbacks of when the teacher assigned a project. It was like one kid did all the work and the 3 were just like, you got this, you're fine, all right, we're good. It's like, walk away.
Yeah, and it's like it's a weird setting when you're at a place where like you want to learn and you're like, I saved up money to be here, like I really want to get the most of this experience, and it's like people are like, I'm just here to have fun. You're like,
Yeah.
no. No.
Well, you wrote the screenplay Four Pints. So how is screenwriting similar to comic book writing?
Um, that's so funny. Like I've been writing for like years and no one's ever brought that up, but that was like a film school feature length screenplay. So it was like a 90-minute movie that was made at Vancouver Film School. And I wrote it while I was in the program, and it was like, so I was between like 2 campuses all the time, basically like trying to coordinate a 90-minute movie as it was being made at the same time, and it was a little chaotic. And so like to this day, I don't even think you could like get this movie. It's just a thing that exists at the film school library. But yeah, it's I think that experience as well led me to comics, where I was realizing what I was saying before, where like working in a big team of people, and it can be a little difficult to navigate just what people's goals are. And I found there was a lot of conflict in what we were trying to achieve, and that made me realize again that I just wanted to pull back and I wanted to just write and be in a smaller environment where I could agree upon like a vision with a smaller group of people. And like that's what comics is. It's visual storytelling where it's only like 4 or 5 people kind of making all the decisions. And like I love that, because like the spirit of film is that you get 200 people together and they're all collaborating to make something. But when you're in film school, everyone's like, I'm gonna make my masterpiece. And like there's just a lot of like clashing egos, and it doesn't always work out well.
Does having experience in screenwriting make for a more cinematic comic book?
I don't know. I mean, like, I think like I think having experience in a different type of writing and then getting involved in comics can be very helpful, because each medium kind of works in its own rhythms and has its own sort of like cadences and stuff. Like, and so if you can like learn the rhythms of film, or learn the sort of conventions of how to like convey things visually and like without any dialogue or anything, then that would probably make for a pretty good comic script as well. But it's not a one-to-one thing, and I think that's really interesting. Like a lot of people, I think, do think it's very similar, but
So you've written for DC, Marvel, Aftershock, and Mad Cave Comics. So does the company you're writing for change how you approach a particular script? And when writing for an established character like Aquaman, how hard is it to find a character's voice?
I don't think the publisher necessarily changes the approach, but I think like there's always a different goal with each publisher that you work with, and I'm sure they have their goals, and then you have your goals as the creative person like coming in. And so I think you just sort of like try to find the best synergy between those two things, and please them and please yourself in the process. And I think that like one of the things I'm learning hopefully is like not everything is to be like the stakes are not do or die, like you can just sort of like come in and try and make the best book possible, and it can just be like a goal can just be to have fun, like, and just have like a good time. And because like any form of entertainment, there's comic books for every type of like reader and enjoyment level of like visceral violence, or if you want to read a comedy book that just sort of like has people hanging out and telling jokes, and that's cool too. And like, yeah, so it's always like a conversation, but like when it comes to an established character, I think you just sort of like the best way to do it is read, research and look at the stuff that's considered the best stuff of with the character, or the most, and try and read broadly so you can kind of look at the different decades and everything, and sort of like try to see the changes, and then find your own take, kind of like learn as much as you can, and then find what you're passionate about. And I think the key is always like trying to find what's core about the character, and then what do you have to say about that character.
When developing a character's voice, especially one like Aquaman, who has had many iterations over the last, since what, 1941, 42, when the character was created. You have the current kind of run on him a little bit. You have Jeff Johns, you had Peter David, Paul Cooperbird. Are you looking for what his voice is now, or are you looking for like a core voice that may have been at a peak?
Well, I mean, like, to be perfectly honest, the Aquaman that I'm writing is like from the Earth-6 Stan Lee sort of revisionist imagining of the DC universe, and so like there's only been one story with that version of the character. So in a lot of ways it's like not a blank slate, because there's a lot of storytelling done in that issue, and who that version of Aquaman is, but like I still did go back and read a lot of different issues from different runs, but at the end of the day, the strange thing about the like Stan Lee Aquaman is, like I said, there's only been one story, so he's not quite Arthur Curry, yeah.
So what has it been like to continue a story started by the Stan Lee? I mean, that's a hell of a burden to carry.
It's cool. Like it's a strange, I won't lie, like it's a strange thing to have DC come to you and be like, hey, do you want to write a story in tribute to Stan Lee for his 100th birthday? But I was like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. And those books are really interesting. It's like he kind of took, at least for Aquaman, he's a very like grounded kind of street level Aquaman, but his whole body is made of water. And it's just like I appreciated it. I thought it was cool. I was just like, oh, it's a little bit different and like fun, and yeah. He's the ultimate like comic king, right? So
yeah. So when you're given this opportunity, so you're doing a short story for a short tales from Earth-6, like you said, for Stan Lee Celebration. One, because this is potentially a one shot, because it's a short, and you're continuing from a one other story, but you may not have one after the one that you wrote. How do you approach a story like this? And like, do you have a particular goal in mind for the short story? Do you keep in mind that there's potential that the character may be taken elsewhere later on after this? What is the thought process when you do it?
Yeah, I think like with a big shared universe like this, that's always the prospect of it, right? I think like I'm starting to think of writing superheroes or writing any sort of licensed property as like you're sort of carrying the baton from person to person. And so like I see it as like, if this is only the second story with this version of the character, just push him forward a little bit, show some new wrinkle of his life, or like what he can do, or what could expand his world. Because I think like really at the end of the day, like that's what comics are. They're these big ideas all the time, right? So like that's what's most fun about it for me. It's just sort of like nudging them ever forward, and then being like, well, if we ever pick up from there, it could be interesting.
Now, I mean, obviously, for very obvious reasons, you can't talk to the originator and ask what they would have done with the character. Are you attempting to determine, when you read the previous version of the Stan Lee's Aquaman, what Stan Lee would want him to go, or are you thinking just what I would like to see this character do in a future story?
yeah, I don't really think about him. Only just because that's like that's the again like the nature of like handing the baton. I guess you think about the person who wrote the previous story and you go like, what about this resonated with me? And then like and then you kind of start from there. But I
Hmm.
think it's always like, yeah, it's like a call and response. And so yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting like prospect, but like you still have to like kind of come at it from your own angle and try and do your own thing.
Is there any whispers of future stories with these characters that there was discussions with editors or anything like that, or was it
Not
just
that
this
I
is
know
a
of.
celebration? So it was just for the celebration. It wasn't sort of like I know some companies, when the characters haven't been around for a certain amount of years, they just publish them in something just to make sure they keep the copyright. Was there any discussion of, well, this does well?
I have no idea,
No idea.
honestly. I'm not privy to such things.
And if you would you tell me?
Well, there's that as well, but I mean, like, honestly, like they just like, you know, I one of the things about freelancing is you just don't have insights into the internal machinations of what's going on,
Well, one thing I
which
did
is
find,
on.
yeah, one thing that you said that was kind of interesting though. You said goals are different from company to company. When you're looking at what DC and Marvel, what were the goals between each company distinct?
I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to sell as many copies of whatever you're writing that you possibly can.
Hmm.
But I mean, like when I say goal, it's mostly just like, you know, there's always going to be stuff going on in a shared universe. There's always going to be stuff that is like going to have certain levels of pressure on a book that you
Hmm.
do at a bigger company, and like, you know, because like at the end of the day, you want to be doing stuff that is successful and is getting more people on board and all that stuff. So like it's tough, but um you have to come in and sort of just go like, okay, sometimes you're working on something and you know that it's not like the biggest deal in the world, but you still have to treat it with the same
Hmm.
like care and attention and uh put your all into it.
Hmm.
um and then at the end of the day, you also have to figure out why you're writing it, because it's very um when someone asks you to write a big character for one of those publishers, like it's very interesting prospect, but I think you always have to ask yourself, like, do you have a story about this person? Like, is this what you want to be working on right now? That kind of thing.
It must be hard as a freelancer because when someone approaches you with a character or something they want you to write, that's not necessarily a character you're passionate about necessarily because it wasn't, it's not necessarily your idea. It's not something that is as organic. You're going with an idea. Sorry, someone's coming to you with a character, then you're thinking to yourself, do I want to say something about this character? Is that difficult? Is it hard to then generate a passion for something that you might necessarily had wanted to or considered writing about previously?
I think like what honestly, like there's certain things that like you really want to do, but then there's other things that you didn't even know that you may have wanted to do. And like, so sometimes a conversation about one thing, like one character can actually lead to another. So like someone could be like, hey, do you want to write this character? And then you're like, I don't know if that would be the best thing for me. And then, 2 or 3 weeks later, they're like, oh, but what about this? And then you sort of have to like, you know, go, okay, what can I do with this? And if you don't know anything about the character, sometimes it's hard to say anything other than like, I just need time to read and look at this. And if you have the time to do the research and look into the character and find your own take, then I think it's always a good idea to work on things, even if they're not necessarily like what you may expect or like, think that you want to write, like I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities when you write smaller licensed characters that
Hmm.
can kind of go anywhere and do anything and sort of be bent at a shape a little bit more and go to interesting places because um yeah, that the pressures of what these characters can and can't do because they're not in other media or whatever are a little bit more liberal, I should say.
So when you're beginning to do research on a character, but how much time do you spend reading these stories and preparing? Is it a day thing? Is it, I mean, are you going out and buying, you know, 10, 20, 30 graphic novels to try to figure it out? How much time does that take?
I mean, it just differs. Like it with everything, like kind of depends on the size of the assignment and sort of how much of that character you're going to be writing and stuff. Like what I find helpful is um like I was saying earlier, like reading broadly, sort of like looking at like multiple different eras of a character and sort of seeing what different takes on the character are, and then seeing if any of that resonates with you, and then sort of thinking about if there's another angle that you can kind of approach it from that's like new and novel, because um there's been too many sort of like everything you know is wrong sort of
Mm,
type approaches, and I think like one of the things that really resonated with me in seeing like House of X and Powers of X debut and be so additive and add things to the mythos and be so generous with other storytelling opportunities and stuff, is that's sort of like what I now sort of understand. The goal of like comics is like to be generous with your storytelling, and especially in those shared universes, and
mm.
create a bunch of opportunities for other people to come in and play. And so if you're leaving all these breadcrumbs everywhere and you're still having a really good time and telling a good story, like I think that can just be yeah, the best way to put it is like just generous, like in terms of building things for other people to play in,
Mm.
because I think that gets everyone excited. It gets readers excited, it gets other creators excited, and it's just like, yeah. So that's my long-winded answer.
Well, I mean, you must be really excited with your new property from Matt Cave. You're writing Nature's Labyrinth. What inspired its creation, and why was now the perfect time to produce the title?
uh, so Nature's Labyrinth is sort of like my tribute to the like battle royale genre, in terms of like a big death game sort of book where um lots of action, lots of like over the top violence, and the goal of it is to sort of like bring that sort of like murder world vibe to a Mad Cave book, and to just tell like a really fun character mystery at the heart of like a big death game. And yeah, I feel like now's the perfect time to launch it because there's only a few comics like that out there right now.
So, I mean, having worked for so many different companies, like I said, like Aftershock, DC, Marvel, why did you think Matt Cave was the perfect house or home for this title?
Well, I mean, like Mad Cave's a interesting, awesome place where they kind of come to you and they say like, "Hey, we've got a couple ideas for you, and is there anything here that you could like respond to?" And so they brought me a couple ideas, and one of them was like close to this, but I was like, well, I'd like to change this, and this, and sort of like spin it this way, and uh, I wanted to change some things with some of the characters as well, and sort of like just sort of put my own spin on a few things,
Mm.
and they were very receptive to that, and were, you know, they were basically like no problem, and so get to build it sort of in a new direction with them every step of the way. And then once we agreed upon sort of like the goal of the book and the series itself, then we sort of like put everything into full swing.
So the book's art is being produced by, I'm going to get the name so wrong. Um, Bailey Underwood. Am I in the ballpark with the first name?
I believe Bailey would be the,
Bailey. All right,
yeah.
Bailey. Apologize to Bailey. Bailey Underwood. What does Bailey bring to the project, and how did this partnership work?
Like the slickest, best fucking action storytelling with like a manga style. And like honestly, every step of the way like elevated my scripts to like really beautiful, sort of kinetic, poetic stuff with lots of really wonderful human emotion on the page. And Yeah, I like honestly such a fan of Bailey's work on this book, and just like once I started seeing layouts and stuff come in as well, and seeing some more of their other work, they did a book that's coming out at Oni very soon called It Took Luke, which is fantastic, and features lots of like heavy sword action. And so I after reading that, I was like, oh my God, I got to put more swords in this book. And I think I tweeted something to the effect of like, I think I need to put swords in everything I write from this point on. So yeah, that just like, um, yeah, like someone I can just give scripts to and say like, hey, like this is sort of how I imagine this, but also like you're amazing at breaking down fight scenes. So like just do whatever you think is best here, because like honestly, like yeah, and so I think they're like stunting on every page. It's going to be a lot of fun for people. I think like did you get a chance to read the first issue?
Unfortunately, I did not receive a review copy.
Oh shoot. Okay, well I can definitely get one into your hands. Yeah.
All right, very cool.
Yeah, because yeah, it's you really got to see it.
Well, I look forward to it. It's a nice perk to being a host. I get to read the comic book.
Yeah, yeah.
That is awesome. So when you're thinking about the style of the comic book, as you said, there's swords involved. In the summary, it states that 8 felons are brought to a mysterious island by the mysterious Ahab to test them. Are we talking like a most dangerous game style thing? Is this, how is this situated for these 8 felons to start going off on each other?
Well, I don't want to like give away too much, because like part of the fun of these games is sort of like why were they thrown into this whole thing? And that's going to be like, a driving force of the narrative is like kind of learning more about who these mysterious people are and what they're capable of and whether or not they're telling the truth about themselves and that kind of thing. But the book opens with like each of them having code names, and each of them you kind of learn what their deal is from their code name, and what the perception is. But the idea of the book is that like not everyone is what they seem, and that even characters that seem like they're trustworthy may not end up being trustworthy because of the nature of the game that they're in. And then the other idea is to like, with all of that character work, to bring in like a unpredictable environment that changes, so every issue is sort of in a new environment, and it has like new weather and new obstacles and new traps and that kind of thing. And so it's been a lot of fun because like it sort of changes colors and stuff as the book goes on. And yeah, and yeah, I don't want to spoil too much.
So interesting word that you said is the word trustworthy, because these are 8 violent felons. So in what way does trust work there?
Well, that's the whole thing, right? It's like when you have people like that, like can you trust them? Are people like that, I guess, capable of making those bonds, or like working together? And there's like, you know, in much the same way that like, even though I wrote the whole book before Squid Game came out, that's like a theme in that show as well, right? Like, can people sort of work together for a greater good, or do they always turn on one another? And I think that's just sort of like a universal theme. When you put people in a life or death situation, are they capable of like setting aside their petty bullshit and just like helping their fellow man?
So why these 8?
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, you have to read the book. That's the whole thing. Yeah, that I can't say any more than that.
So, because I mean, this is a game, my understanding, to the death with 8 violent felons. Are there rules in place for these felons? Do the rules matter to these people? I mean, how do they view the game? Is it just an opportunity to kill? Is this an actual thing that they're going to follow along with?
Well, I'll say this in a very vague terms because again, like you'll see this in the first issue, but like there are strict rules and there's a system in place for what happens when you break the rules, which you see very clearly. And then once you see that, you understand sort of what the stakes are and also how the rules work, because there's sort of like a host mechanic to the game. So like someone that's talking to them basically saying like this way or that way. And so like that's the delivery system for the rules.
So in the summary that I received, I think it's probably the primary summary that's been out there for the comic book. It states specifically that someone has infiltrated the island to reveal its secrets. Will it be immediately clear to the reader who this individual is, or that's part of the mystery?
It will be clear to people at the end of the first issue who that individual is, but it will not be clear until you finish the first issue.
Now they're infiltrating the island, but it doesn't say are they doing it to win the money because there's a jackpot at the end of being a victory, or there's another motivation this character has.
Well, I mean, another motivation, a secondary motivation.
So I know you may not be able to answer the question again, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Will this character is this basically character also set up as the audience surrogate in the story? Like, is this the protagonist, is the infiltrator? And he's the one that basically will be the eyes of the reader going through this event, or all the characters one time or another of the focus.
Yeah, I mean, all I'll say is that one character is not who they seem, but I won't tell you who it is.
Okay. Another interesting trick is because you're writing these 8 felons, how do you build empathy from the reader to root for the 8 killers? Is there backstories? Through backstories? Is it the infiltrator that's supposed to be the empathetic one? How's that working out?
Well, again, like because you're in this situation and you're thrown into this situation, all you have is what people tell each other. And so like I think that's a very interesting thing to play with, right? Like you don't have anything to rely on other than what other people tell you about themselves. And so whether or not that will stay a thing and whether or not something changes at a certain point and whether or not you see all the people who are in this situation at all the time, like like there's the POV shifts a lot, but each progressive issue you sort of learn more about what's going on in this game and who everyone is and what their motivation is. And yeah, it's just like an onion, like it just keeps going.
So as you were writing it, was there a lot of characters who changed, or when you started writing, did you already have the outcome already set, or was there certain characters like as you're writing, you're like, I need this character to go a little bit longer because he's just too cool to kill off now, or something like that?
Oh yeah, lots of that. The interesting thing about writing something like this is that it's 6 issues and I have 8 characters. So I had to create like a big board on my wall and sort of track who was alive and who was dead, because like you just like and also where they're going to die, because you have to kind of plot this out quite a bit to make this work, and then the focus sort of gets tighter and tighter as things go down the line. And so like yeah, it was fun though, because I did almost every character sort of changed where they ended up from what I was like planning to do, and then I just fell in love with a bunch of different people and wanted to like push it a little bit further. And yeah, that's the best part about doing something like this, is that you sort of like always surprise yourself. You're like, oh, I thought that guy was supposed to die, but he's a lot more fun if he's alive and screwing shit up for everyone else.
It must have been fun to figure out the fun ways to kill these people off. Like, did you think of like, I need another cool weapon here, or like you said, swords earlier, with the different kind of things? You're like, I really need to figure out how to get this into the island to kill somebody with.
Yeah, so again, without going like too far down into like spoiler territory, like each character I sort of like designed from the ground up with like a background, who they are, what they're going to say about themselves, and then sort of like if they fight or if they knew how to fight, what would they know how to do, and what kind of weapons would they use if they were to do it. And so that's really fun, is like writing characters that can like do kung fu, or like can, to go back to another point, to use a sword really, really well. So like that, like I tried to create opportunities for myself so that if I was like, oh, I want to write an environment where they walk through like this, and they're going to find this type of weapon, that some character can use that, and then it becomes like a really fun action scene, and having the space to sort of do the kind of thing. So there's like, each issue has like a nice long action scene, like 6 or 7 pages long sometimes, that just sort of, we allow it to play out in that chaos of it all. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Now, as a screenwriter, and with the amount of comic books being turned into TV shows and movies and things of that nature, is there any thought of while you're writing it, what this would look like on a screen? Are you thinking about it at a thematic level?
No, not really. I mean, like, I just, at this point in time, like, all I want to focus on is the comic, and usually just like try and write the best comic that I can. And honestly, like, usually those are the ones that end up going elsewhere. Like, I think if you just focus on doing the best job you can, and you don't think about it, any other version of it, because, like, it may never happen. So it's best to just sort of like focus on what you're working on at the moment.
So when can our listeners find Nature's Labyrinth?
It is out in November.
November.
Yeah. Got bookstores everywhere, but if you're interested in it, you should definitely pre-order it now.
All right, very cool. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, so much. I hope our listeners pick up Nature's Labyrinth. It sounds awesome. And I'm very curious to read the issue if you're kind enough to send it over so I can take a look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, you too.